And welcome to our second edition of the Signs of the Times. You may remember that we finished the first one with the American dollar losing value, and we're going to pick up on that as we go forward. But right now I want to introduce you to another biblical principle which will help us with our understanding of how this fits into prophecy. And this principle is called the repeat and enlarge principle. Now, prophecy is built on this principle. It will say something and then it will repeat it and enlarge it, and it does this several times as we get into the book of Revelation. But the whole Bible is based on this principle, and that's what I would like to share with you now so that you can understand how this helps us with our biblical understanding. The best way to illustrate it is with some illustrations. The actual verses in the Bible are often cut in half. They're kind of like the first half is the first thought, and then the second half, there's the second thought, which includes the repeat and enlargement. So let's just go through a few of these. Come now, let us reason together, saith the Lord. Though your sins be as scarlet, they shall be as white as snow. Now that's the first thought in this verse. Now here comes the second one. Though they be red like crimson, they shall be as wool. Now I think you can easily see that this is a repetition in the second part and an enlargement as well. So this is an easy one, but not all of them are so easy to see. So let's carry on. The first thought, purge me with hyssop and I shall be clean. Second, wash me and I shall be whiter than snow. So again, repeat and enlarge. First thought, create in me a clean heart, O God. Second, and renew a right spirit within me. So you see that this is basically repeating the first part but adding a little more information. The sacrifices of God are a broken spirit. Second thought, a broken and contrite heart, O God, thou wilt not despise. Now, these are often easy to spot in Psalms and Proverbs. This is very Hebrew. This is the way Hebrew is written. And you know, in English, we like rhythm and rhyme. In Hebrew, they like repetition. So this principle can help us to understand Scripture as well. For example, this one. Here is the patience of the saints from Revelation. Now, that is the first part of the verse. Now, the second part is going to define what the patience of the saints means. Here are they that keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. Do you see how that works? The second part defines the first part. You see, we can read, here is the patience of the saints, and we think to ourselves, now what does that mean? Well, we don't have to wonder too much because the second part of the verse defines it for us. See how repeat and enlarge really helps us understand? Here's another one. I delight to do thy will, O my God. Now, what is God the Father's will? Well, here it is in the second part. Yea, thy law is within my heart. The second part defines the first part. Now, in Scripture, there are two records of creation, and that has been confusing for some people because they think the second one is a kind of confused part or not a true, accurate record of creation because the two seem to be contradictory, but they're not. The first one is simply the first statement of how creation is made, and then the second one comes along and repeats and enlarges upon it. They're not contradictory at all. There are 4 Gospels. Each one of them is sort of helping to explain the other and adding more information. Now, repeat and enlarge is very prominent in the Psalms. If I was to ask you to describe the Psalms, the content of the Psalms, or the focus of the Psalms in one word, what would it be? Well, the word fits into the square there, and the word is 6 letters long. Would you like to hazard a guess? Come on. It's praise, isn't it? Anybody who knows anything about the Psalms will know that the Psalms are about praise. They're like poems or hymns to the great God that we serve. So in Psalms, the word praise does not appear until chapter 7. There's no hint of praise before that. But here you go. Look at this, the last Psalm. Look at this. How many praises are there? Quite a few. And this is how it works. It's like a symphony. You know, a musical symphony starts off basically slow and it sort of builds and builds and builds to a crescendo. And that's exactly what's the same construction of Psalms. It repeats and enlarges the praise to God. We also find it in Matthew 24. Now, you may remember this is the sermon on Mount Olivet that we were talking about previously. So you can see that it's basically broken up into 3 sections. Jesus talks about false Christs and false prophets and gospel to all the nations. Then shall the end come. So that's how it ends. And we have a sort of a timeline there with this arrow. Now the second lot, it talks about the destruction of Jerusalem, and it extends itself into 1260 years of persecution, and then it ends with his glorious personal appearing. And then that takes us a little further into the future. And then the last one talks about the signs of the times, if you like, or the things that are going to happen just before Christ comes back. So that extends us even further into history, or to the end of time. And this is how the prophecies are also constructed. They start off in the Old Testament. I'm thinking of Daniel 2. Starting off in Daniel 2, and then they're repeated and enlarged in Daniel, and then each time we move forward a little further to the end of the time, and then the book of Revelation is about the events of the end of time. And that's basically a repetition and enlargement of Daniel. So I think you understand a little bit about how this principle works. But as we go through these presentations, we're going to be speaking more and more about this principle. Now, we've been dealing with Agenda 1, the Imperial Agenda. We've done that one. And now we're on to Agenda 2, the Bretton Woods and the Petro-Dollar. And we left off with the dollar losing value, right? So how did America save the dollar? That's what we're going to continue with. Now, I want to introduce you to a power behind the throne. His name is Zbigniew Brzezinski, and he is a very influential figure in the Obama administration. And he's been an influential figure in all American administrations, no, perhaps not all of them, but at least way back to Jimmy Carter, when he was the National Security Advisor for Jimmy Carter. So he's been around for a long time, and he is one of these people who are pushing a certain agenda and a policy that the Americans are following. And he wrote this book called The Grand Chessboard, and in this book he's letting out some of the secrets or some of the goals that the American empire is trying to achieve in the world. And what he said, I'm summarizing this, what he said was, in order to control the world, one has to control Eurasia. Now that's that portion of the world that you can see there. Eurasia is Europe and Asia put together. It's that part of the world that has the biggest landmass, and it also has the largest population. So anybody who wants to control the world has to control that. And then he identifies what part of that part of the world needs to be controlled. In order to control Eurasia, one needs to control its center. And you see that ellipse there? That ellipse contains 70% of the world's oil reserves and about 65% of the world's natural gas reserves. So it's a very strategic part of the world, and it's no accident that this is where all the turmoil and wars and strife are in the world. So Henry Kissinger agrees with Zbigniew. He says if you control oil, you control the nations. So this is what it's about, my friends. This is the empire trying to achieve hegemony, trying to achieve the control of the world, and this is where it's going to happen. It's going to happen in that strategic ellipse. And this is the oil solution to the dollar. This is where America has gone to preserve the value of their currency. And I want to explain to you how this works. First of all, the most important country in this, as far as resources go, in this ellipse is Saudi Arabia. It has 260 billion barrels oil reserves and 263 trillion of gas reserves. That's cubic meters of gas. So in the eyes of the American empire, Saudi Arabia is a very strategic country. So what they did, the American administration went to Saudi Arabia and they said, we want to make you a deal. And this deal is what actually sustains the value of the US dollar. The secret deal is generally attributed to Henry Kissinger, although nobody has really come out and said who claims the authority for the first, initiating the idea, initiating the deal. It was formalized in this agreement called the US-Saudi Arabian Joint Commission on Economic Cooperation. So what is this deal? Well, Saudi Arabia is a country that has a lot of enemies, and they also have a lot of oil and gas. So America went to them and said, how about we guarantee your security, like forever, on the condition that you only sell your oil for American dollars? And the Saudi Arabians said, that sounds like a good deal. So they went for it. But there was one catch. The Americans sort of put pressure on Saudi Arabia to put pressure on their OPEC mates. That's the oil-producing countries that have formed a sort of a cartel, and they cooperate together on the price of oil, that they too will only price their oil in US dollars. So now the US dollar is gone from being backed by gold to being backed by oil. Perhaps that's why they call oil black gold. And you may remember that almost immediately after this agreement went into effect, we had this energy crisis. Do you remember? For those of us who have memories, and for those of us who have long enough memories, you will surely remember living through this period when petrol was scarce and it was also expensive. In America, they had a system where, a system whereby you could get gas on a certain number of days if you had a red flag or a yellow flag or a green flag. In New Zealand, you had to choose which day you were not going to drive, and you had to put a sticker on your car saying, I'm not going to drive on Tuesday or whatever. And if you were caught driving your car on Tuesday, then you were severely fined. And this is because oil was in short supply, supposedly, and people had to be rationed. Now, you may remember that this oil crisis of 73 and 79, where there was two of them, the oil price shot up. So that meant that in 73, the oil price increased from $3 a barrel to $12 a barrel. Now, that's a huge jump, and for any economy to absorb. And then in 79, it went up even further. And those of you with memories will remember this. And what this meant was that if the oil price went up, then the value of American dollars went up. How does that work? Well, it's quite simple. You see, everybody had to buy their oil in US dollars. That means that all other nations had to go out and earn American dollars first. In other words, they had to export to earn American dollars, and then they would spend those American dollars on oil. But because the price goes up, then they need more American dollars. And as the price increases all the time, they need more and more and more American dollars. So you see, this is what made the American dollar very valuable, because everybody needed the American dollar to buy oil. And oil was expensive, so they needed lots of American dollars. So what that meant is, every time we are filling up at the station, we are actually subsidizing the American economy and lifestyle. And to the point where they were benefiting hugely from it. Now, this has happened before in a slightly different way. You remember the British Empire? Well, the British Empire was sustained by carrying the world's trade in British ships. That's what sustained the British Empire. And that's what made Britain rule the waves, rule Britannia. I'm sure you've heard of it. Now, what has happened now is that the world trade is carried by the US dollar because it's not just oil. The whole world economy is dependent on US dollars as the reserve currency. What does that mean? That means that all the deals that are done between nations are done with American dollars. Otherwise, you have to jump around in exchange rates with different currencies, and it's always fluctuating. It's bad enough when you're trading with, say, for example, New Zealand dollars with Japanese yen. It's much easier to make that trade with American dollars. So that's why America has the world currency status. And what does that mean for America? Well, it means that America basically gets, it's been estimated, 25% of the world's goods and services for free. Now that's a great deal, because you've got to think, this is what America does. In order to buy stuff, all America needs to do is to print dollars, because the whole world needs dollars. And so it's been estimated that this reserve currency status that it has is worth about 25% of the American lifestyle. In other words, if America lost reserve currency status and nobody wanted their dollars, then their lifestyle, their economy would decrease by about 25%. And of course, they don't want that to happen. So world trade is now a game in which the US produces dollars and the rest of the world produces products that dollars can buy. To have it explained in a sort of economist's world, let's read this. The world's interlinked economies no longer trade to capture a comparative advantage. They compete in exports to capture needed dollars, to service dollar-denominated foreign debts, and to accumulate dollar reserves to sustain the exchange value of their domestic currencies. The higher the market pressure to devalue a particular currency, the more dollar reserves its central bank must hold. So let me try and explain that. If you want to have a currency that is relatively strong, then you need lots of American dollars in your central bank in your country. If people recognize that you have lots of American dollars, then they will consider that your national currency is a strong one. So not only does the world have to trade in American dollars, they have to accumulate American dollars in order to have a strong national currency of their own. So you see, the demand for American dollars is huge under this system. So in order to make this system work, the dollar used to be backed by gold, but now it is backed by this. You see, the only way this system can work is if the US military makes it work. I think maybe you're beginning to catch on why we have so many wars and strife. You see, the British Empire functioned exactly the same way. The British Empire was backed by the British Navy. That's why Britain always had a huge navy and was considered the ruler of the seas. And that is because all the goods of the world were carried by sea. And as you know, things have changed a little bit. They can carry them by air now, but that doesn't matter because the British Empire has disappeared, basically. But the American one is very much alive. And that is why America is prepared to go to war at any time to preserve the system that they have that benefits America so much. That's how empires work, my friends. An empire always works to exploit the periphery of the world for the benefit of the homeland. That's exactly how the Roman Empire worked. And I don't know whether you know this, but the people who actually lived in Rome, they got free bread and they got free circuses, free entertainment. So that's how the empire benefited the inhabitants of Rome, the citizens of Rome. And the same thing operates in the world today. This is how the American empire functions, basically the same way. It's just a little different. And as the Roman Empire was prepared to go to war at any moment to preserve its interests, America, it's no different. Right, I want to explain now the petrodollar recycling system, because this is where the debt comes in. Now, as these oil-producing countries had a high price for their oil, they were accumulating massive amounts of US dollars. Now, they were accumulating so many dollars, they weren't able to use them all. So what did they do? They recycled them back into the Western banking system. Let me just show you this bit here. It says, what is a petrodollar? The money that all exporting nations receive from selling their oil, which is then deposited into Western banks. What did the Western banks do with them? Well, you know, if anybody deposits money into a bank, they expect a return on their money, don't they? Maybe a few percent, maybe. But the banks have to then find places to invest it. So what they did was they had billions and billions of dollars, these petrodollars, lying around in their bank accounts, and they really had only one market, and that was to lend such huge amounts of money to national governments. So I want to now move on to that. This man here, John Perkins, he calls himself an economic hitman, and he wrote this book called The Confessions of an Economic Hitman, which was a New York Times bestseller. And he is describing in this book what the banks did with these billions of dollars and how these billions of dollars were used to benefit the empire. And he worked for a company called Maine, which is not a well-known company, and that's probably the way they liked it. That's what John Perkins himself said. They don't like the limelight. So I'd just like to read you a couple of excerpts of how he describes his job as an economic hitman. So the overseas loans that were given to nations, they were actually given so that US corporations could profit from them, and this is how it worked. There were two primary objectives to my work. First, I was to justify huge international loans that would funnel money back to Maine and other US companies such as Bechtel, Halliburton, Stone and Webster and Brown and Root through massive engineering and construction projects. So what they did was they lent huge amounts of money to nations, and these are all third world nations because they're the ones who want to build up their nations and build infrastructure. They wanted bridges and hydroelectric schemes and roads and all these things that most other nations have. So they need money to pay for it. So they were lent this money by the empire, and then the empire's corporations would come into these countries and use that money to build whatever they wanted built. And most of that money would return again back to America. So do you get it? They lend them huge loans. Then American corporations benefit from the work that is done in these nations, and the nations are left with a huge debt. Look what else. Second, I would work to bankrupt the countries that received those loans after they had paid Maine and other US contractors, of course, so that they would be forever beholden to their creditors, and so they would present easy targets when we need favors, including military bases, UN votes, or access to oil and other natural resources. So you see, the empire uses these petrodollars to get other nations into debt. And I don't know whether you can remember, but in the past, nation after nation would be in financial crisis, and they would have to call in the IMF, which was founded at Bretton Woods, and they would have to be lent even more money. And what they did was they simply rolled over the debt. As long as the debt is kept, as long as the debt is still paying interest back to the banks, they're happy. And what they do is when they're due to pay another round of interest payments, they simply lend them more money. So the debt gets higher and higher, and that's why this empire is an empire of debt. And in this book called The Empire of Debt, they write, "How did America become an empire? We don't recall the question ever coming up. There was never a debate upon the subject. There was never a national referendum. No presidential candidate ever suggested it. Nobody ever said, 'Hey, let's be an empire.' People do not choose to have an empire. Gradually and unconsciously, their thoughts, beliefs, and institutions are refashioned to the imperial agenda." Now, I know that many people love America, but what they're in love with is they're in love with the America that's enshrined in the US Constitution. That is not the America that exists today. That America has gone. America was never meant to be an empire, but it is now, and because it has become an empire, all these other institutions that support democracy and republicanism, and I don't mean the Republican Party, I mean the Republic as a constitutional political entity, all those things are now undermined and almost destroyed by the empire. While no one noticed, the imperial weed put down roots deep in the soil of North America. By the early 21st century, hardly anything else grew. It has completely crowded out the delicate flowers planted by the founding fathers. So what we are seeing now, what is the signs of the times, is that wonderful concept of a free, democratic, Republican America has basically been destroyed, and it's been taken over by imperial policies, imperial agenda, and it's rapidly turning into a police state. You see, when 9/11 happened, that was a wonderful excuse to start destroying American liberties. And the things that have done in America recently are just diabolical. You can go to jail in America and they can throw the key away, and legally they never need to open the door again. And all sorts of terrible things have been put in place, and American freedom is basically destroyed. And people are going to find that out very shortly, because that is also one of the signs of the times. So you see, America is not the country that it used to be. And if you're in love with the old America, then you better start getting used to the new America, because the new America is going to impose its will upon the whole world. And you better wake up and smell the fascism, because that's what's happening in America, and that is what's going to be exported to the rest of the world in the not too distant future. So I just want to summarize. America is an empire. The American dollar derives its value through oil. The American dollar is the reserve currency of the world. The American dollar dominates world trade. The American economy would be impacted if this changed. And that's why America is fighting hard to make sure it does not change. America is prepared to use its military to defend the dollar. Exactly. That's why you see the American military all over the world, but especially in the Middle East, because that's where the oil is. But that's not the only reason. That's not the only reason. We'll come to that at a later stage. The American empire subverts the basic American principles. And that's it. You see, you can't be aggressive overseas and be democratic at home. That's just, it's a contradiction, you see. And that's what the American people are finding out, that because America is so aggressive overseas, they're also going to be aggressive domestically. Next time we're going to look at, why did America invade Iraq after 9/11, especially when Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11. And that's something that even the Americans admit to. So I know that you have heard, most of us have heard, that America invaded Iraq because somehow they linked Iraq to 9/11, and then they linked it to weapons of mass destruction, but that's not the real reason. The real reason they invaded was to support the imperial agenda. And so that's what we're going to look at next time. And I just want to mention again that God is in control. And let's read this psalm. Why do the heathen rage and the people imagine a vain thing? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, let us break their bands asunder and cast away their cords from us. He that sitteth in the heavens shall laugh. The Lord shall have them in derision. So, my friends, I know there's some nasty things coming, and we're going to be talking about some of these things. But please, put your trust in the Lord, and he will see you through.